Welcome back, everybody. Professor G. What I want to do now is I want to give you a brief introduction to Luther's theology. Maybe a brief overview, especially for those of you who aren't that familiar with Christianity and with Christian theology. So let's talk about what exactly makes Luther unique, what makes Luther stand out. And I think we could do this by focusing on what's called Luther's theology of the cross. Now, theology is the study of God, or literally it's the science of God. And theology is a discipline that arose out of trying to interpret some of these complex ideas that are found throughout the Bible. Ideas such as the Trinity. Ideas such as, what does it mean that Jesus is God? Or Jesus is both God and man. How do we make sense of that? What does covenant mean? So theology is devoted to understanding what are essentially religious concepts and trying to explain, in the West at least, theology is trying to explain these concepts in some sort of rational manner, in a way that makes sense for people, a way that people can understand. So Luther's theology of the cross. What makes it different? So, for most of Christian history, salvation is how we are saved from this world, how we are saved from damnation, how we are brought into communion with God. This is what we mean by salvation. All religions in any ethical system is concerned with doing what is right, concerned with doing what is good. So ethics in general would say that a person is good if they conduct or if they perform good actions, right? So somebody who constantly gives to the poor, most people would say, oh, well, yeah, he or she, they're a good person. Somebody who cares for their family. Somebody who is constantly helping other people, we would say, yeah, that person is good. And we would say that they're good based on their actions, based on the fact that they do good things, right? This is pretty much common sense. I think this pretty much resonates with most people, right? If I say I'm a good person, but I fail all of you for absolutely no reason, you might have a hard time believing that. Just as if I say that I'm a vegetarian and we go out for lunch and I order a big hamburger, you might say, I don't really think you're a vegetarian, right? So we typically define and we typically say that somebody is good if they do good things. And for most of Christian history, Christian theologians have stuck with this idea. Thomas Aquinas, a medieval theologian, comes up with the Christian theory of virtue ethics. Okay, somebody is good not just because they do a particular action that is good, but they are good because they are virtuous in general. Virtue is a matter of habit. They do good consistently. It's not that I give to the poor one time, but I make it a habit to give to the poor. I make it a habit to care for the poor. And this is what Aquinas calls virtue. This may sound strange, but Luther disagrees with that. This is where Luther stands out in theology. And this is what Luther's theology of the cross is. Now, in the New Testament, in the Gospels particularly, the Gospels are the first 4 books of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Gospels tell about the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. It is the central text upon which Christianity is built. Now, out of this tradition comes the Christian idea of redemption, that Jesus' death on the cross, his crucifixion, somehow redeemed humanity, that Jesus' death is what saves us. Okay? That Jesus, who is God incarnate, God in the flesh, sacrificed himself in order that human beings may come to God. It's a tradition that's taken from the Hebrew Bible. So if you're not familiar with the Hebrew tradition, this may sound a bit strange for you. But the ancient religions had always had this notion of sacrifice, right? I want to appease the gods, I create some sort of sacrifice. Within the Hebrew tradition, we have this too. You killed a pig or a cow or a dove in order to atone for the wrong that you had committed. And you had to do this because the price had to be paid, right? If I'm in your debt, I have to pay you. Some manner of payment has to take place. Jesus' death is the ultimate sacrifice, according to Luther. Now that may sound pretty straightforward to you, but Luther really brings out the implications of this. So, what then must somebody do to be saved? How do we come into a relationship with God? Luther says that in asking that question, you are framing the answer in an incorrect way. Why? Because Luther says there is nothing that you can do. Me, as an individual, I can't do anything to obtain God's favor. You can't do anything to make God love you or to be in some sort of relationship with God. Okay, so what exactly does this mean, or what does it imply? So people aren't saved based on their actions. You can't do anything to be saved. So who then can be saved? Right, this is what Peter asked Jesus. Who then can be saved? Luther says everyone and anybody can be saved based on the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross. So this is his theology of the cross. Everyone is redeemed by Christ's sacrifice, and you don't have to do anything to deserve that. Why? Because it's already been done. You are already saved due to Christ's sacrifice. This didn't sit right with some people, right? So, how do you determine if somebody's a Christian? Well, you would say, well, Christians are supposed to be good people, so I'm looking for somebody who's doing something good, somebody that's out there feeding the homeless, or somebody who's out there, I don't know, helping poor school children get textbooks or something like that. Luther says, no, that's the person being saved, the person being a Christian, was fully accounted for by Christ's death. They don't have to do anything. Right? You obtain salvation not because of your own actions, but because of God's actions. So this is Luther's theology of the cross. And I just want to give you a brief introduction. The text that you're reading will describe this more, but it's a very interesting take on one of the most fundamental Christian doctrines, the idea of salvation. Now, Luther changes other aspects of Christianity as well. For example, Luther, in his interpretation of the Bible, is going to change things such as communion. Communion is a Christian tradition of eating bread and drinking wine, or for evangelicals, drinking grape juice, in remembrance of Christ, in remembrance of the Last Supper that he had with his apostles. He's going to change that into a more symbolic interpretation, right? We do this in remembrance of Christ. It's not that Christ is actually present with us at communion. We do it in remembrance. Luther's also going to break away from this tradition, this idea that priests can't get married. Luther's going to marry. Protestant traditions after him. Protestant preachers are oftentimes married, right? So all of this stems from this fundamental idea of his theology of the cross, right? So if you have any questions, email me. Especially about concerning the reading. If not, I'll see you on the discussion board.